was just thinking, I wonder if there's a legal issue with reproducing artwork like the one behind me on a YouTube video. I don't know how that works. Hopefully, I just won't get taken down because of it. And decided to go ahead and give my 2 cents on the whole controversy with Dr. Seuss going on right now. The lighting here is terrible also. So I kind of stayed out of it just because I didn't really know the details and I wasn't really invested enough to be concerned. But more and more people have started talking about it, and I finally kind of said, okay, I want to know exactly what's up here. There's a few things that I want to talk about in regards to this. The first thing is I want to mention I've read almost all of Dr. Seuss's books. Of the books that are being banned, I've read 5 of the 6. The only one I haven't read is the Cat's Quiz book, which I don't think I'd even heard of before, but yeah, I'm a big fan of Dr. Seuss. Is he my favorite children's writer? That's a hard question to answer, but certainly someone who I think is still fun for both kids and adults today. So that being said, when I read the books, did I notice any racist portrayals of characters? The only one that I really remember standing out was If I Ran the Zoo. I think there's a line in there that goes something like, if there's a place in the East called Zinnikazant where the people wear their eyes at a slant, something like that. And that obviously is a pretty not okay thing to say about Asian people, and it's clear that he is talking about Asian people from the picture and the rest of the description. Although I'm not sure how you could say that and not have it sound like a racist thing about Asian people. Anyway, Dr. Seuss was an extremely political writer, considering that he wrote what is generally thought of as innocuous children's books. He tackled, a lot of people know that Yertle the Turtle is a metaphor for the Nazi invasion of Poland and how Adolf Hitler was getting too greedy, I guess. Lorax is not even a metaphor for environmentalism. It's pretty much just obvious environmentalist in its message. And the Sneetches is his own, I don't know if we would say autobiography, but it's based on his own coming to terms with the racist culture that he was raised in and realizing how silly he had been for being born into this and still buying into it as an adult. His characters, he did have a history of racist portrayals, not just in his books, but also in a lot of political cartoons, especially the anti-Japanese sentiment that was going on in World War II was very much a thing that he contributed to and took inspiration from in his political cartoons that he was putting out. And I think, I can't tell you the exact who was paying him to do that or anything, but I know there's a display about Japanese internment at the Smithsonian where you can see at least one, maybe more of his cartoons that were really pushing that same agenda that Japanese people are inherently not to be trusted. And that was the old Dr. Seuss. That was the Dr. Seuss from before he met, I can't remember his friend's name. He dedicated the Sneetches to a friend who he met who kind of forced him to come to terms with his own ignorance when it came to race and find a better path. And so I absolutely think we should still be reading Dr. Seuss to children, and I don't think there's any reason whatsoever to cancel Dr. Seuss. I think quite the contrary. Dr. Seuss is a story, his life is a story of someone coming to terms with their own ignorance and their own prejudice and overcoming it. But the question of the six books that he wrote about or that portray racist stereotypes, so the first thing I want to say is the people who seem to have a problem with this are also people who I would generally term libertarian. And to that end, I think you have to face the music that this is a choice being made by the corporation, or maybe not a corporation, but by the company that owns the license to Dr. Seuss's works. It's not something that the government is forcing them to do. It's not something that is being forced on them in any way, at least not by any way other than the free market, which is what people claim to be standing for when they're libertarian. And if we lived in a world where the majority of consumers were okay with buying things that contained racist portrayals, you might see the company pushing those six books or at least publishing them. I don't know. Maybe the company really does put their values above their finances, but that is a very rare thing in a free marketed economy like we have. So, to that end, this company is making the choice that they think, I believe, they're making the choice that they feel will make them the most money. In terms of that, this isn't a battle over censorship. If anything, it's a battle over self-censorship, which I think every company and every individual has the right to do and probably should do. The other thing is, do we need to stop publishing works just because they were a product of their time? Certainly, there are thousands of books that were published in a time when racism was the norm, that were published by people who didn't take into account the fact that racism was wrong and didn't try to rally against that, H.P. Lovecraft is a fine example of that. Should we continue to publish these books? Because we know that that's a part of our past and we shouldn't ignore it. But here's the thing. These books were intended for children when they were first published. And they're intended for children when they're published today. If they were published without the intention of children, I think a good comparison would be the Seven Lady Godivas, which from its onset was intended for adults when it was published and has seen continuous publication for a number of years now. And I don't think anyone has an issue. Of course, by today's standard, it's not nearly as obscene as it was when it was first published. But the 6 books that we're talking about were all intended to be read by children. And we need to remember that when children are reading books, they're not critiquing them through the same lens that adult readers are. I can read an H.P. Lovecraft book today, or a Dr. Seuss book for that matter, and say, okay, here's what I like about it, here's what I really don't like, and I understand that these characters are being portrayed in a way that is not correct, that is deeply prejudiced, that is deeply ignorant. And I understand that's not the real way the world works. Children are much more, in my opinion, they're much more likely to interpret a book, even a book as surreal as a Dr. Seuss book, as a portrayal on some level of the way things sort of naturally are. I remember specifically a book that I read when I was a kid, and it was a book about building model airplanes, and for some reason it told you should get a bobby pin, and it said something along the lines of, you can probably find bobby pins with your mother's makeup things, or something like that. And I remember thinking as a little kid, that's probably not a phrase that would fly today. But I'm glad to be reading this older book where they can say things like that, because I have a mom and she has bobby pins, and now I know where to get them. But the problem is, I had a mom. Not everyone who was reading that book had a mom. My mom used bobby pins. Not everyone's mom uses bobby pins. And we want to make sure books aren't suggesting a normality, a normal way of life, or a natural way of life that is contrary to an inclusive, egalitarian life that we want our kids to grow up in. Kids do need to be taught that racism exists. Kids do need to be taught that the world has problems. But the way that is taught needs to be very specific and very precise. Because we know we're in a world where there's still a very strong residue of a time when racism was the norm and it was very accepted by everyone. It's important to remember that this idea that racism is wrong is a very new idea, and one that people were still fighting and dying for at a time when humans were first walking on the moon. This isn't ancient history, and we can't treat it as such. So I don't want to see Dr. Seuss's past be erased because it's an important part of his story, and it's an important part of our story as a society. But I also want to make sure kids aren't seeing the bad part of that story and seeing that as normal. And to that end, I think, great, we're not doing that. A lot of old Disney and Warner Brothers cartoons, when DVD collecting first kind of became a big deal, were released on these DVD sets. And I remember there was some very, really racist portrayals of various, well, I think mostly African people. That's what I remember, but there's probably more. When they released the collector's edition of the Looney Tunes DVD, before they played the racial stereotypes bits, they had Whoopi Goldberg come on, I think it was Whoopi Goldberg, give a message, and she said something like, "This is wrong now, and it was wrong then. But we don't want to ignore the fact that it was happening, so we're portraying it as is." That's an easy thing to do on a cartoon. Not so easy to do in the foreword to a book, because that's not a part that most kids read. And especially a book that is geared toward beginning readers, like most of Dr. Seuss's books are. Furthermore, the collector's edition of those Looney Tunes and Disney, there was also a Disney one with Donald Duck, where they had, I think, Leonard Maltin come on before the cartoon and say, "Hey, sorry about the Irish stereotypes and the black stereotypes," and maybe some others. Those were intended for adult collectors, by and large. And if this publishing company saw it feasible to create a version of the 6 books in question intended for adult collectors, I think that would be great. I don't know how that would work. How do you keep something like that out of the hands of children is a difficult question. But the point is, while these books are being geared toward children and being published for children, I think it makes sense to publish them in a way that wouldn't encourage kids to see the racial stereotypes and come to the conclusion that those racial stereotypes are correct in any way. And that's all I wanted to say about that. Thank you very much. Have a great day.